Without further ado, let's get started. Setting the new standard in test data, 3 steps to seamless, secure, and smarter test data management. That's what you're all here for, and hopefully we can provide that for you. So I think we do have a great presentation for you today, featuring 2 of my colleagues and today's speakers. Firstly, I'd like to introduce James Walker, the co-founder and CEO at Curiosity. James has worked with some of the largest organizations worldwide to identify and resolve their test data needs. And he's built on that experience to develop our 3-step approach that we'll be talking about today. We're also joined by Hugh Price, chairman and co-founder of Curiosity. Hugh has often been described as the godfather of test data. You know, he's a serial test data inventor and has worked with the world's largest organizations to transform their test data management. So thank you both for joining me today. And, let's get right into it. I think, James, I'm handing over to you to talk a little bit about Curiosity and our new approach.
Yeah, thank you, Mantas. Wonderful introduction, as always. I'm sure I can feel Hugh cringing, as you said, the godfather of test data. But yeah, hello, everyone. Very, very excited for today's webinar. As Mantas said, Hugh and myself founded Curiosity Software about 7 years ago. And it's been quite a journey throughout that time. Not just for ourselves building the company, but I think also just looking at how the test data landscape has changed so much over that time. And also even now, just looking at, the technology and how everything's evolving, the world of LLMs, even during that 7-year snippet, the world of technology has just changed so much. But having said that, our mission as Curiosity has stayed the same the whole way throughout. We are really on a mission to develop the new standard in enterprise test data. And I think if you look at a lot of the tools, the approaches, just everything out there in the market at the moment, from my view, it's kind of stagnated. A lot of organizations are still involved in masking. A lot of organizations are still involved in kind of your classic test data approaches. And really, I think what we're hoping to get across and show you today is the world of test data has really evolved on from that. There's new technology, as I said, there's a whole new world of everything going on. And really, I'm proud to say that Curiosity has been developing new technology on top of that, the next generation of test data platform, which is AI powered, and it's fully end-to-end to support organizations, enterprises on their test data journey. Throughout the 7 years, and Hugh has obviously been in the space much, much longer, we've worked with a lot of large enterprises, helping them with their test data initiatives. And the reality is every organization is just so data driven now. I think test data is probably the most important topic in every enterprise. Data is obviously probably the highest ticket item that is on every CIO sheet somewhere. I think if you look at data, it's such a broad spectrum now as well. It could be a relational database, which is probably how most people perceive data. But also, it could be going all the way back in time and thinking about legacy mainframes, which is a word I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about. But I think also now we've got packaged applications in the enterprise. We've got APIs, we've got messages. The spectrum of data is just so broad now, it's ginormous. And, I think the key here is Curiosity. We call ourselves an end-to-end platform. And really, it's to support that broad spectrum of everything you see in the enterprise around test data, synthetic, masking, cloning, packaged apps, databases. It's everything that is in an organization, and everything that is there as test data as part of that, right? If you just go to the next slide, Mantas, that's okay. So what we've been doing at Curiosity is we've been developing a new framework for test data as part of our platform. And loosely, this platform we're calling Discover, Act, Monitor. And we see these as 3 core phases for any organization when they're implementing their test data initiatives. So if I think about a typical organization today, there's just so much complexity. I was talking to a CIO about 3 weeks ago, and the CIO was telling me that he has a team, and that team is responsible for governing, supplying data, and managing data for over 4,000 applications in that enterprise. And honestly, that's not the smallest number I've heard. It's probably about average. But if you're a central team or you're involved in an organization with that many data-based applications, how are you meant to manage this landscape that's faced in front of you, right? So the first phase here, discover, is really all about discovering the application landscape in your organization. And Hugh's going to show a little bit of technology later on, which basically allows you to connect across your organization, cast a net over all the applications, bring them in, and understand exactly what data you have, what schemas are there, what columns, attributes, everything that exists across your organization. And I think that's absolutely key. What I've seen a lot in enterprises, especially when they're going through and coming up with their test data strategy, if you don't have a good overview of exactly what that landscape looks like and the data you have in it and all the intricacies of that and the lineage and how everything's tracked together, it's very hard to come up with a solid test data strategy that you can move forward with. You're kind of poking around in the dark, right? So I think discover is absolutely critical. Once you have discovered data, you can move into acting appropriately on the data that you have, right? And this is where you come into your kind of classic test data activities. So that could be things like masking, synthetic generation, cloning, subsetting. You know, it's probably a lot of the test data words that you guys on the webinar are very familiar with already. But I think the other piece that I'm really excited about here is the final step, which is monitoring. And, you know, I was speaking to an organization recently, and they spent a lot of time discovering that application landscape by going through and performing stakeholder interviews and going into various projects and poking around, asking questions, looking at the technology that's there. But the challenge you have is that if you're going through that approach, the moment that you've gone through and you've got a fair representation of what the data looks like, it's immediately out of date. And monitoring is really, really critical. It's a proactive approach where you can continuously monitor the applications you've connected into. And as soon as the data, the underlying data representations change, which they will because everyone's in agile and applications are changing all the time, you can have various hooks and triggers that go back to that discovered landscape and update it. And you can proactively govern and align your data landscape with your test data routines, your understanding of that data as well, and everything from it. So we're going to be talking a lot more about this framework today. I think it's nice because it's very simple. It's a 3-step process. And, you know, this is something that we see as being overlaid onto most test data projects. And it's a framework that we're supporting inside the Curiosity platform. Hugh, I'm going to hand over to you. I think you're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges you're seeing in enterprises to begin with, right?
Sure. Here I am, the Godfather. Wow.
I knew you'd like that.
The trouble is, I'm in New York. The most Godfathers in New York usually end up in prison or being whacked. So, you know, you got to worry about that phrase. Okay. So anyway, okay. So I'm going to just, you know, I'm going to sort of get a little bit sort of gritty here in terms of actually how do you actually go and get this kind of almost practice or best practice into an organization. Now, you know, productivity, someone's got to pay for it, and I think that's kind of the issue. People, every single developer, QA person, business analyst, trainer, whatever, is always messing around with data, and they don't realize really how much time they spend actually doing that. Now, when you come and say, oh, we need a tool, or we need a process, or we need to change the way we work, someone's actually got to say, well, okay, well, we're not doing that now. Why would we do that? So you need to have a coherent argument to be able to present to budget holders, you know, in terms of, well, what's this going to bring me? What's it going to bring me? Now, you know, I've been working in this space for 30 odd years, and I've seen kind of the good, bad, and the ugly. But I would say that, you know, the productivity is probably the number one thing that you can get with even a sort of 50% test data strategy. You can definitely improve productivity. Secondly, you can reduce the number of bugs being found later in the cycle because you tend to drive up the quality. And then the other one, which is kind of the hidden one for kind of larger projects, is unleashing parallel teams. Lots of teams are always kind of waiting for other data, etc. So I think those really are kind of the sort of key things. There's the obvious ones, competitiveness. You know, if you don't understand your own landscape and you've got a challenger bank coming up, they've got a much simpler landscape, and you are trying to bolt your stuff into your legacy data, you're kind of struggling. Compliance, massive. You know, there's still tons of kind of production like data in development systems, etc. So there's lots of stuff published on that, and don't want to particularly beat that one up. Quality assurance teams, trying to influence better practice across organizations, they tend not to have too much power. So it's kind of difficult for them to come and say, look, we want to change some of our practices. We need better. We need you to write more information about the data, the genealogy of the data, where it comes from, the descriptions of the data. However, there is also a big budget now around kind of AI adoption. And, the thing about AI adoption is you've got a training data set. So how do you create a training data set? We'll just use production-like data, but that's really not good enough. If there's any, most production data is almost identical. So what's the point of that? If you want to try and see what happens when you have different types of historical, patterns in your account behavior, then you need to synthesize that and think about, learning and adapting, and being able to move quickly. So I'm just going to kind of dive into a little bit, the Discover Act Monitor, which was sort of the previous slide, was kind of a sort of more kind of marketing-y type things. Now, this this ability Discover is actually probably better if I just actually kind of nip over and show you. So this is what we call our data insight screen. Now, when we're talking about Discover, it doesn't just have to be kind of databases. It can be ERPs. It can be messages, which are pretty much the lifeblood of large organizations where you have messages floating around. Excuse me, just gonna have a little drink. And also, if you think about it, an API payload is actually a package of data. Okay, so this is just our data insight screen. You will see lots of lovely information on there. Basically, these are some of the acts that are going on. These are all the schemas. This is what's going on. We've also reverse engineered out of it. We've scanned the data. Again, this is all very easy to do. You don't have to do too much. And we pulled out a whole bunch of kind of what we call data quality rules, and we can run those rules regularly, kind of looking for, to see if there's any data errors in there. And then you'll see sort of data growth as we're moving through it. You'll also see changes that are going on. New tables have been added. All of this information would then fire off into messages, automatically notifying teams that something's changed with an API, with a message structure, etc., as opposed to, people asking or forgetting, or then something breaking, and then you say, oh, something's changed. So all of this kind of almost comes automatically from you. It doesn't take much to set up. One of the things we will also do is scan the data looking for patterns. Again, AI is just fantastic for this. We also use kind of multivariate analysis and all sorts of things like that. And out of that, we can then sort of give you an understanding of how things are tied together. So we'll automatically say, well, previously we didn't really know too much about it. Let's have a look at the customers, and we can kind of look to see where the patterns and how these tables relate. You can see employees refer to themselves, customers at orders go back to customers. And, also, you can, we've put lots of visualization in the tool. Here I can see my order items. To get to the location, it's a 4-table hop. Now, once you add in integration testing, where you're looking at across multiple systems, you can see, well, to get to my claim to my payer, what is the chain of relationships that gets me from A to B? Sounds a bit technical, but these are the kind of detailed things that you kind of need to kind of extract out of your system. And the reality is that nowadays, especially with AI, and James can talk about that in a lot more detail, you can kind of do that in a sort of very easy and much more interactive way. Okay. Just to talk a little bit about, I'll just finish with the front end, and then I'll go back to the slides. There's also a few things you can do with kind of auto documenting, this monitoring and kind of keeping things up to date. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But this basically is the metadata, and in effect, what we're doing is creating a metadata repository of all of your data assets. This lot didn't exist, and what we've done is we've used AI to go off to our repository of JIRAs and also some backend information that we have on the web. Sorry, some information that's on publicly available on the web, and we've auto-documented these structures. Just again, we'll refer to this later when we're chatting. We also provide a whole bunch of, in effect, prompts, which are the brains behind So these are prompts that would then be fed into whichever AI engine you're using, and those prompts then allow us to, so we're in effect providing with a massive library of these prompts, and we're kind of expanding them all the time. Anyway, back to good old slide decks. So this discovery, AI accelerated, etc., is really key because it's very difficult to kind of start with a test data strategy if you don't know, we want to go somewhere, but we don't know where we are. So being able to use AI has been critical there. The acting, I'm going to just go talk about some of the kind of things that are kind of pretty important in terms of the acting. The masking, that's pretty well understood. I would say the other thing that people forget is finding data, or data reservation and finding data. If you look at how developers, testers, BAs, business analysts actually work day to day, they actually spend a lot of time looking for data. Now they can do it through front ends, they can do it from Excel, downloads, SQL, extracts of data, hunting through with text, etc. So what we've done is we've got this very systematic approach to being able to find your data. We gather up the queries that are being regularly sent through the data requests. We gather up and track all of your data requests into a central place, and then we build up a library which is then reusable across the organization to say, oh, I've seen that before. We're going to go over here. Would you like to reserve some data? And we then reserve it for 10 days so you don't step on each other. Very important for automation, by the way. I would say people have done a pretty good job of being able to improve their environments. Sometimes it sort of took 6 months. Now you can spin them up in a matter of minutes. The bit that's missing is the actual appropriate data for, we provide virtualized databases, but you can also then tag on that the ability to enhance that data, maybe age that data, maybe supplement it with a good covered set of orders containing all the different variations of orders, payments, and customers. When it comes to synthetic data, you've really got to think about, synthetic data. What do we actually mean by that? We're actually meaning pushing data into databases. Sometimes you can't do that. And what we do is we would basically expose the APIs to push the data in through maybe an ERP system, and then push the data in through that. But we parameterize it up, we expose it into our portal, and then that allows you to create the data that you want in a centralized and standardized way. Okay. There's one as well which I would kind of talk a little bit about. This I think is a much really powerful tool. A lot of people provision systems. They're very keen on getting production data into their development systems because that's the truth. That's how they think of the truth. The problem is that actually what they really want is just the little bits of data that occasionally they need to find something, they need to repair a bug with it, etc. Now, a good way to do that is to clone just the data you need out of a production copy, mask it, and bring it in. It will have a different set of primary and foreign keys. However, that data is in effect the same data in terms of all the characteristics of it, but you've brought it down. That is a very nimble way of working. You can also use cloning to create lots and lots of variations of data. So you could say, well, I've only got this one long chain history once, and I want to calculate the closure for it. How do I calculate that closure? But once I do it, I close the long chain history. So let's just recreate that and create 1,000 of them. So I can do this every time. Okay. The monitor, I've used this wonderful word AIify, which didn't exist until about 10 minutes ago. And this is basically is using the power of those prompts to basically monitor pretty much anything in your estate. It doesn't have to be data related. It can be environment related. It could be, you've got various tools that create various assets to support development. You can basically use the prompting to go and scan those, and we have a full RPA engine sitting at the back to be able to do that. So I'm just going to quickly just talk about what's worked for other teams. Now, just to keep the sort of nitty-gritty bit going here, test data requests are extremely varied and much more complex than understood. We used to work for a big American corporation when they bought us, and when you're talking to a CEO or a CIO, said, "Oh, okay, fine. Well, we'll just copy production data, and you just go buy a tool and spend $1 million on it, and fine, you're done." That is probably about 2% of what you actually need day to day when you're dealing with the sort of fine finger control associated with test data. Also, the types of requests that are coming through are so varied, it's crazy. I mean, we were chatting with a company the other day, and we said, okay, well, we've got all this really cool stuff which manipulates Excel, and it turns out that the test data team is probably spending about 30% of their time actually just managing Excel sheets which are distributed between teams and masking bits of them and creating bits of them and sending them out to external vendors so that they can do data analysis and things like that. So, you know, fine, we can automate that. We can build a few tools around that, but then that's gone away, and then you can move on to more interesting things. So I think getting people, especially management, who don't quite understand that, you know, first of all, that test data and data is what their company is, and secondly, it's complicated, and you need some cool tools, and there's plenty of them out there to be able to help you drive all those efficiencies that you need in your organization. There's the constant swing to a centralization team and then cancelling them because they didn't work as expected and then putting it back out to the project teams. The budget tends to switch around between those two. That's a problem, because then you try and pay for, you know, some kind of central best practice software and the other teams don't want it. So, you know, that is a perennial problem. I've seen probably 50% of our companies have COEs, 50% have decentralized, and in 4 years' time, they will have completely reversed. I would say you do, however, need a very small team at the very least, which basically kind of coordinates, builds best practice, and kind of gathers up all the good stuff in an organization and spreads the love around the organization. So I would strongly recommend something like that. The centralized management of all data assets using AI, you know, pretty much 4 months ago, this really didn't exist in any coherent way. I think now that we've kind of brought this to market, it's actually very straightforward to just let these tools beaver away and kind of pay off a lot of the technical data you've got. Pull together all existing test data utilities under central control. Why do you want to do that? Because you can start measuring. You can see how often these things are run. If you're just asking, you know, James to run this utility from time to time by sending him an email, you've no idea. Now, the thing is, whenever you try and create these central teams, people get a bit worried, and especially nowadays with budgets, it's like, oh, well, we'll just lose that team. Just get rid of them. They don't do anything. You know, what do they do? Give me 5 things they've done, you know, in the last month. I'm paraphrasing there slightly. So if you, the thing to there is basically get some quick wins in. If you look around, there's either some high-profile projects which are struggling to deliver, and mostly it's generally because of the unavailability of complex data. You can crack that one. You can pick off the things that people do most of the time, like finding and reserving data. The other one is we have you may have seen some of our webinars on Quality Modeler. Quality Modeler is fully integrated into this tool, and that allows you to model variations. It also allows you to model data flows. All of those things help you build very easily much greater sets of data. Once you've created a model of all the different particular variations of the credit checks, of all the variations of the discounts, how they work, then pretty much you can basically create all the different data to satisfy that both the negative and positive variations of that are created. As I mentioned before, teams waiting for data is a big one. If you've got any team waiting for data, then they are a potential candidate for you. This one, use AI to monitor and document, pay off legacy debt, keep it up to date without monitoring. This is a big area for us. We're doing a lot of work on this. You know, if you think about it, if someone's checking in a Git a bit of code for a new functionality, chances are lurking around in the API is some kind of SQL. That SQL is actually a join. That join actually can be just incorporated automatically using AI into your model, into your definitions, into that spot diagram, into that lineage diagram, to understand how this new data fits in with the old world. Now, you know, most entity diagrams you see stuck on a wall are usually 3 years out of date. Let's use AI to keep that up to date and let people know what's going on. And like I said, create a small team that coordinate or provide services to project teams. So, whoops, all right, let me just go back to that one. The Discover, Act, Monitor. this is just kind of a rough kind of idea of what we tended to work. As a rule of thumb, I think you should for any project you set up for test data, you need to get benefit. Initial benefit inside one sprint and full benefit inside 2 sprints. And you pick a project which is going to do that. Whenever you've got projects that run for a long time and require lots of input, then people start to lose faith. So you've got to kind of get a few wins early. So that's kind of a sort of a good piece of advice that has worked, I think, pretty well. Let's have a look at this. Critical pay for central teams, unified data visibility, federated data, integrated data. We've incorporated the ability to federate data. Federated data is really good for kind of understanding. So this is this idea of being able to, in effect, say we've got this data in this system and that system, but I'm trying to create a message, but that message is going to fail unless I know all of the other information available to it. So pick the right account codes, the right discount codes, make sure the broker is active, all of those things. So this unified data visibility also allows you to do really good kind of analysis to see how good your data is, because you can actually just gather up the core business attributes that you care about and provide information. Simplified data management, basically a single pane of glass as opposed to everything. Proactive data delivery, as you're monitoring, automatically create data. You might say, well, okay, I'm going to use AI to make sure that I create a set of standard orders every day. Fine. AI is going to go and do that for you. Governance, one of the things there again is if we're continuously monitoring things, if we discover data which is failing any of these PII rules, again, they're most likely in development before they even get to production. We should be able to do that. Okay, and I think we've talked about AI quite a lot. So these slides here actually pretty much cover what I've just said. So I've kept them in because you may want to use them inside your organization. So monitoring, staying ahead of change, proactive alerts, policy enforcements, data quality insights, continually looking to see if there are joins that we can detect, then going off and validating that data. One of the issues with data quality is that especially in development and legacy systems, you actually have quite a lot of bad data, which is fine. In legacy, you know about it because things have changed, the data lineage has moved on, and those rules don't really apply anymore. But in development, it's actually quite difficult to test because you've ended up with kind of a lot of rubbish data. One of the demos we give actually is where we take a sort of fairly messed up development system and we just bring out sort of 95% of the data, leaving the rubbish behind. And that's actually kind of a good way of kind of starting with a nice clean database. But again, most of that is done automatically because we've discovered those relationships for you. Okay, so I think, James, this is kind of back to you now. Is that all right?
Yeah, no problem. Hopefully I'm coming through. Yeah, that was great, Hugh. Thanks for that. So I want to take a bit of a step back, actually. I've been preaching this all this week, actually. I learned a new word called vibe coding last week. And this kind of highlights the transformation I think that AI is having on software development. If you're in front of Google right now, just type vibe coding in. And I think even if you don't like it, most engineers these days are using AI for coding. I think it's just a given. And vibe coding is kind of a, I don't know what you call it, like a process where engineers are just prompting and getting code from the LLM, going backwards and forwards. So, you've got a prompt saying, go and generate a login screen for me. It comes back and you'll say, okay, now I want you to go and add this validation onto this field. Comes back, do a few refinements, change it again, etc. And I think that's particularly interesting because it just shows the power that AI is having in software development, right? And I think if you come back to what Hugh was talking about and come back to the beginning, and you think about some of the challenges that enterprises are facing today, if you've got thousands of applications under your control, if you're a centralized team, you've got a handful of people in that central organization, probably. If you're decentralized, you're maybe one person, spanned across multiple projects, or it's self-consumed by a project. But it doesn't matter how you cut it. It doesn't take a math genius to work out that, you've got you've not got a lot of people dedicated to each database and each application, within the organization, right? And it's kind of an impossible task. And this is a conversation that just keeps coming up and up again as Hugh and I go around talking to CIOs, talking to leadership in organizations. Is everyone is looking at their budgets at the moment. Everyone is immensely challenged by them. Everyone has huge data initiatives going on, and there's just not enough people and not enough time in the world to get all of these tasks done that are needed, right? And we really see that AI is the answer to driving massive efficiency, especially for data understanding in organizations, right? And I think hopefully, as you've seen from what Hugh was showing there, we've built a lot of AI all over the product to really help accelerate and advance these data understanding, right? I don't think we're at the point where AI is going to take the jobs of data engineers. I think we're living in the world where AI can really help accelerate a lot of the data initiatives and at least accelerate a lot of the low-hanging fruit and medial tasks that are a little bit trivial, and take them off of your guys' plate so you can focus on the real nitty-gritty hard work that's in front, right? So as Hugh was showing, we spent a lot of time in the platform building out specialized prompts. So, we've been applying prompt engineering to create really good, solid prompts that can go in and perform some of these data tasks. But what we've also done for our platform is we've built several kind of AI agents for things like sensitivity analysis, looking for PII, applying business intelligence to go and auto create queries, which can be used to go and, accelerate finds and makes in the platform. We've built AI agents which can come in and start to group data into known concepts, which can start to self-document various data in your organizations. And that's really empowering, right? You've gone from being able to, having to do all this stuff manually to literally coming in, connect to a data source and having this AI go off and do all of it for you, right? And that's really the power, I think, is we're coming to an age where you can almost have a team of mini AIs supplementing, the very small central team, helping to make sense, govern, supply test data to that massive application landscape that's there, right? And I think the power is incredible. One of the other blockers I think that's worth mentioning right now is some enterprises will not have access to an LLM. And maybe some of you on the phone, that is the shape of your organization. I can guarantee there's someone somewhere in your enterprise who is experimenting with LLMs and trying to figure out how can we get this technology into the enterprise. The other piece here that we're looking at is these LLMs are just getting smaller and smaller every week. I was just looking online yesterday, and there was the new Gemma Google model released, and it can run on a CPU. It's 4 billion parameters. The response you get back is actually pretty good. So I think at some point in the future, we're going to be there, probably in the next 6 months, where we can actually ship an LLM with the product and have that as part of the capabilities that are there. But I think just on this slide particularly, I think the vision for us is AI is just so powerful. I think a lot of you are familiar with going into ChatGPT, typing stuff and getting stuff back. But really the vision is for us is building, these prompts that are well engineered, these agents that can come in and help you guys manage your test data throughout. Hugh obviously showed some snippets of that, but also if you guys are interested, definitely get in touch. We'd be happy to set up a session and show you, some of the AI that we've built, but also the vision we have for where test data is heading with AI in mind. Hugh, anything you want to add to
that? No, that sounds that sounds great. Yeah, I mean, I would just say that for any of you guys that are listening, we're very, very happy to just chat. So if you want to book in a session with James and me, maybe Shash as well, who's one of the kind of a bit of an expert in this space. Honestly, I would encourage you to do that. A 45-minute chat where we just kind of understand what you've got. It's useful for us because we kind of learn what's going on in the market, and we can show you around, as we said, with some of the stuff that's in the tool, just to kind of give you an idea. And of course, maybe you might even buy some of our stuff. But we're very, very happy to talk. Please follow up. Manta's probably going to bang on this at the end, which is good, but we really mean it. I mean, learning where people are from our point of view is very useful, because we tend to build tools to try and get people from C to D, but if everyone's at F, there's no point, kind of thing. So What else have we got? Okay, do you want to just talk about this one, James, a little bit? Or shall I do it?
Why don't you go and I'll fill in around.
Okay. So yeah, so just to talk about the top two left ones, which is kind of Santander. So those numbers look quite enormous. So I mean, the reality is they've got thousands of programmers and developers, and for them, what we've done is we've created for their legacy mainframe systems, they've created lots, and I think like, I don't know, 10,000 different types of data requests that they can filter and find, and then they use those to actually populate all the data into the development and QA environments that they need to do, and that's done in a few minutes, and then they just immediately start developing and testing, so they're not hacking around. The joys of devs actually manually changing code, putting flags in so they can test a little scenario, don't really exist in Santander, who are, by the way, very good. I would say we deal with the Brazilian Santander, and they're very, very sort of forward thinking in the way that they approach their development practices. There's basically this idea of that the bottom left is really about this creating coverage, and what we were doing there was just generating lots and lots and lots of variations. Think of it as we're creating lots of messages to test and to certify that these messages would get accepted correctly and get rejected correctly. And if you think about it, there's all sorts of different regulatory alignments coming in. There's all sorts of new business rules coming in for those messages, and every single day that system has to be certified. So this ability to generate those variations of data is kind of pretty important. Actually, the Everfi one, I'm not familiar with that one. James, do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah. So I think this is quite interesting. It's definitely going to be relevant in a lot of organizations where automation was just such a challenge, and especially coverage around testing as well. And Everfi was really, really interesting, actually. Well, they are interesting in that if you look at their platform, they just got acquired by a company called Blackboard, actually. If you look at their platform, it's all about educational guides that you typically see in enterprises. So it's like compliance stuff, like if you're in the world of banking, it's training on know your customer, blah blah blah. And if you look at their platform, what they actually have is lots and lots of widgets which make up these larger training courses. And for them initially, the challenge they had was that people were just creating these training courses all over the place using YAML files of different configurations. And they were really struggling with being able to keep up with that pace of change they were seeing, and also knowing that they were getting a good level of coverage when they were performing testing. So they went into, they started to apply model-based testing throughout the organization. And obviously we have a tool on that called Quality Modeler. But the thing with model-based testing is it allows you to build up reusable components. And if you look at one of these training courses, there's like 20 to 30 different types of widgets that can make up one of them. So they went through and they created models with automation attached. It was Cypress, actually. And then basically that allowed them to go through and chain together bigger models of the kind of end-to-end scenarios of the training courses, right? But then what they actually did was one step further, and that was whenever a new YAML configuration file got checked into Git, they would actually pull that down. They built their own wrapper around our tool, which allowed them to pick up the YAML configuration file, auto-build the models, which then auto-build the automation out the back end, right? At the time, I was amazed by this. I still am, but what I think is also amazing is that, we've kind of been guilty of this in this webinar as well, as talking about AI, and you kind of fall into this trap of thinking, oh, I need to AI everything to solve this problem, right? Or what's the AI solution that must be able to help? But actually, a lot of problems out there, it's just picking apart and applying some intelligence, and then maybe looking at a process that works today, like some kind of test data process, picking it apart and understanding how can we make this and automate it, right? How do we understand that process and apply automation? And that's basically what Everfi did. And that basically got them from a level where coverage was kind of a big question mark. They had no idea what their level was, into the world of having a very systematic approach where they knew the level of coverage they were achieving, and actually it was almost fully autonomous by the end, check-in all the way to automation with no AI, just some good parsing, some rigorous structures, and model-based testing on the top, I suppose. Yeah.
And all data-driven.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so I think, Mantis, is probably enough. If we maybe pick up some questions.
Yeah, sure.
Do you want to say about control, actually? So
yeah, just did. All good.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, hopefully that's coming through. So yeah, thank you, James. Thank you, Hugh, for covering all of that. So we have had a question. It's quite a long one. So let me just read it out for you. Or you can read it in the chat, Hugh, if you like. But the question that comes from Rudolph, it says, before bringing production data into a non-production environment, we need to classify it based on predefined data classes, which are defined by textual descriptions and specific rules. Based on this classification, we determine which data needs masking, which can be used without masking, and whether anonymization or pseudo-anonymization should be applied. Does our platform support this use case? Specifically, can we automate data discovery and classification based on definitions and rules? Additionally, does it offer configurable masking strategies aligned with our classification model? I think the answer is yes, but Hugh, do you want to?
Yeah, but I'll go into a bit more depth. So we've got tons and tons of scanners. I mean, the scanners are, and we just kind of revamped them actually, so they're pretty high performant as well. Now, there's all sorts of different things that you can detect as being potentially PII, and we can take some of those rules and maybe create regular expressions. We can look for data which is in seed lists. So you give us some examples of data which you would consider to be PII or problematic, and we will actually hunt for that data around there. It sounds like you do have some very specific rules there. I mean, basically just book in a session, we'll have a look at it and we'll map them. Most of them will probably map to something we already have. If there's anything that we don't have, it's pretty easiest for us to kind of add that in as a custom rule. If it's a dynamic change where you kind of had a whole bunch of different rules that may vary over time, then we'll just have to kind of work out, do you put it in our tool, do you use your tool and we synchronize or whatever. So that's the first thing. Second thing, we have a zillion different masking capabilities. I think the key thing with masking is generally, and again, we were talking to company yesterday about good old VSAM, and VSAM drives pretty much everything. VSAM's a file structure on mainframes. That if you think about, you've got all your customers on there, so we start masking all of our member data on there, or our customer data on there, and that data then, but you've got all your ancillary systems who also have member numbers. So you've got to make sure that those member numbers, social security numbers, everything like that kind of match up. So masking is not just one thing, one shot. You really do need to kind of tie it all together and to make sure you've got a coherent strategy. And because we've got this kind of integrated platform, it's easy enough for us to, we know all the definitions, we know all the relationships, we know what matches with what, and then when we build those rules, we can then basically just make sure that those rules match so that the same maskings perform from one to the other.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Hugh. So I just wanted to talk about this poll that we ran at the start of the webinar. So we asked the audience here, how often do you find that your test data doesn't cover all necessary scenarios or edge cases, right? So we have spoken a bit about data modeling and data journeys and data coverage. But the most popular answer here was that frequently was the answer, right? 50% of the poll submissions said that they frequently find that their data doesn't cover all scenarios. I mean, Hugh, James, could you talk about that? And
I'm not surprised, actually. Maybe I can go first, Hugh. I'm not surprised, because actually it's really hard to create data that covers all the scenarios, right? And that was certainly a challenge that we saw before we started Curiosity. If you're faced with some tables in front of you, some messages, it's very easy to pick off one or two scenarios and start to actually build them out. But the reality is, if you don't have something that we call modeling in the mix, it's so hard. And modeling is basically where you can come out and you can visually draw all the different scenarios. So that could be, we're going through a credit card application process. We have someone over 18, under 18, what's their credit rating, blah, blah, blah. You're going through all these steps. you visually draw out that process, and then what you can do is you can use that model to basically hit a button and say, go and generate all the data for me with these scenarios at this specific coverage level. And honestly, without modeling, I have no idea how you do that. It's a hand cranked process, right? And it's all dependent on who is creating the data, what is mentally top of their mind, and what's available, right, Hugh? It's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, what you'll find is if you look at one of the things that we tend to do when we do these kind of we come in and do like workshops. One of the first things I do is give me your test plans, and those test plans give you an idea of how rigorous the testers, developers, QA organization have been in terms of building up sets of tests that actually are testing vast amounts of code. And you know what the expected results are for those tests, which quite often they don't. A lot of them have just started with one and then you just copy it and make a small change and copy and make a small change. So, that just really isn't systematic. It's not scalable. You also need to think about, if I'm just changing this one component, I want to test this component much more rigorously and leave all the other ones alone. So this ability to move the dial in terms of the different levels of data variation that you want to impose, because I've changed that bit of logic. So why do I want to build all of the variations for the rest of everything? I'm just testing that credit rating take-on mechanism. So that's the first thing. The second thing there is negative testing. I mean, we do also have this concept called combinatorial or complex data testing as well, which is you don't know what the expected result is. But a good example, I mean, you should think about 80% of your tests should be negative. So a good way to do that actually is to use as one of our other techniques where you don't really have enough time to do the modeling, or that you haven't quite got around to modeling it correctly yet. You can basically just use the complex data, and that will create you paired triple combinations of it. A good use of that, if for example, is I referred to a bank where they were creating these messages. What you want to do is create all of those messages with lots of bad fields in them, and complex data is perfect for that, because what you'll find is that some of them will make it through, and that's really easy to do. I mean, all you really do is just give me the 20 fields I'm dealing with, give me a list of all the potential rubbish data that could go in, generate me 20,000 of them, chuck them in, 20,000 should be rejected, and lo and behold, 300 will make it through. Those 300 are the ones that are going to bring your system down, because they've made it in with all sorts of rubbish in the system, with all sorts of pre-checks. And later on, you find a bug. I think the reason for the 50% people having problems is that you may well have some bad data, which you then got to somehow recreate, because you're getting this bug because this didn't exist and that didn't exist, but then that should have existed, but how did that get in the system in the first place? And suddenly, your entire day is devolved into writing small queries to try and find out what the hell went wrong. And then it's usually 3 miles away that caused the problem. So I think the 50% is about right. The other one is recreating, getting bugs in earlier. Actually, Nationwide, where one of our customers, they had a strategy of trying to create. They would. Here's another top tip, is to go to talk to the teams before they even start development. What are your plans? When are you going to need some data? Create pseudo data for them before they even start creating the table definitions. You already know the variations of the business objects you care about. This is going to be a new type of account. We're going to have these types of balances, but we're going to also interactively create products as we go through, and then we're going to assign those products as those products get brought on. Fine, brilliant. Let's just create it all in. We just generate a whole bunch of Excel or CSVs. People look at them, they go, great. Those are the types of variations they want. The work that you've done up front actually is building you. What you're doing then is actually getting into the world of modeling to drive better requirements, which then are also building data, which you then push into the system. So your developers, the very first day that they start developing, would have 5,000 different variations of those customers and accounts and products would already be there. So they're not spending all their time literally typing in one and then another and then another. You will find most of your bugs then get found within that development sprint, within that development cycle. The massive cost savings of that are enormous. The further they get along, it's literally exponential in terms of the cost. And if you look at virtually every single time that they say there's a major outage with some credit cards or whatever, or some bank goes down for 2 days, the cost of that reputationally and actually in terms of the time to get that fixed is astronomical. So basically, do a bit better earlier. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you, Hugh. Thank you, James. So I've got two more questions for you. The first question is, where should someone start? And then how quickly can they gain value from the Curiosity platform? So looking back at, this slide, thinking about Discover, Act, Monitor, Hugh, where would they start and how quickly could they get going?
First thing, gather up what you have. You probably don't know that in your organization you already have a whole bunch of good stuff. Great. So if you've got a bit of money, buy our product, chuck it in. We would take all of those data requests that you're doing and put them into a single pane of glass where people could request them, where your automation tools can request them via API. Brilliant. What you do then is let that run for a while. You will then actually start to gather the volumes of requests, who's requesting it, that type of thing. Secondly, just kind of unleash the scanners to try and pay off technical debt. Just go through, try and discover as many relationships as you can. Again, it doesn't take very much to do that. This is all kind of just sort of setting up the system, scan all the databases, understand what your landscapes are, etc. The next thing then is to start picking off projects. Like I say, try and get a project that's going to give you a win. First one is actually finding data. Most people would try and hunt for data. You go and interview a team. Well, how do you find your data? Oh, we've got this query. Oh, great. What do you do? Oh, we've got a different query. What do? You've got a different query. Bring those queries into a central place, put them in the portal and let people start requesting data through you. And when they request it, you can say, would you like to reserve it? And we maintain a list of who's reserving which primary keys or account numbers at the same time. Being able that's probably one of the simplest things to do straight away. And then you've got to win some friends and influence people. You will have your masking issues. Masking is actually pretty hard to do because it's quite a big thing, organizational change. You've got to get buy-in from lots of people in the organization to be able to say, right, these are the fields. Do you sign that those are the fields? That there's all sorts of politics around that. So sometimes just being able to automate what people do, bring it into a central place, synthesize the data creation of messages, data, customer data into a flat file. All of those things are actually relatively simple to do, and you get some wins to be going on with. It also gets people thinking in terms of, well, maybe we don't need to take the whole of production. If we've got this system which is going to create orders for us automatically every day using our automation framework, great. Why don't we just expand the parameterization of that and then maybe put some modeling on top of it to make sure we have all those variations? That's probably, that gets you up and going, and you've got some wins certainly within 2 to 3 months.
Perfect. Cool. So just the last question here before we close it out. James, I'll give this one to you. I'll pop up this nice slide for you as well. And the question is, what really sets Curiosity's platform enterprise test data above the rest, right?
Wow, what a question. Look, I think there's two things here. I think firstly, it's an end-to-end platform. I think if you look at test data, usually the way it's approached is just by lots and lots of little tools stringed together. And I think there's definitely benefit to having that in a full end-to-end platform. And underneath that platform, it's the full Discover, Act, Monitor, right? Discover your IT landscape, act on it, monitor it, keep it up to date. If you have lots and lots of disjointed tools, that's incredibly tricky to get the benefits of the full end-to-end platform, right? I think the other capability here, which we're seeing enormous efficiency on in organizations, is AI. It's driving AI-based efficiencies around the entire end-to-end platform we've developed. And there's really no one else out there who can do that. And that's really our power. And that's really, how we help organizations, I think.
Perfect. Thank you, James. So really, I think all that's left to say is, that's all we have. Thanks again, everyone, for joining, for the questions, and for my colleagues, James and Hugh, for the great presentation. If you'd like to carry on the conversation following the webinar, there are a number of ways you can get in touch. As you can see on your screen now, please get in touch via LinkedIn or email for Hugh and James. We're super keen to talk test data, especially test data management, and how we can help your organization streamline your test data journeys. Feel free to reach out, get us on a call, book a meeting with us on our website, and other ways, of course. Additionally, please follow Curiosity on LinkedIn, where we update regularly with new content, upcoming webinars, demos, and other interesting tidbits. all of these slides and the information, the recording will be shared with you in a follow-up email tomorrow. And finally, we're hosting a follow-up webinar on the 16th of April. Register today and join us for how to gain complete visibility of your test data, where we'll be going over a lot of our monitoring and discovery capabilities with live demo presented by Lena. Cool. So, don't miss this opportunity. Please visit our website, register. But yeah, without further ado, I think all that remains to be said is a huge thank you for everyone for joining, and a massive thank you to James and Hugh for presenting today. Cool.
Thanks
See you
so much.
next time.
All the
Thanks,
best.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.